Hi, everyone. Welcome to this conversation. We're going to give people a little moment to join. But what I would love to know, have you been to any of these Senterej conversations, or is this your first one? And what drew you to this one? Because it would be really interesting to know this is the sixth in these conversations looking at financial architecture in a moment of no rules. And it would just be really great. I know there are some new faces and there are some very familiar faces. But for Jo, who is moderating today, I think she would love to know who's been here before and who hasn't. Uh, so please use the chat and please use the chat all the way through. Um, We're going to be joined today by Jo Swinson from Partners for a New Economy, who I've mentioned will be moderating this conversation with her and Brett Scott, and Indy Johar, who should be with us imminently. But I'm going to hand over to Jo, and we can actually get started. But please use the chat throughout. Raise your comments, your questions. We will come to them. We will open the floor. And really look forward to your insights. So, Jo, over to you.
Thanks very much indeed, Tamsin, and great to see lots of you already putting things in the chat. And Arturo, your comment reminds me that it's sometimes really helpful to know who we're on a call with and where people are coming from, so we understand the different perspectives. So yeah, feel free to also stick your name and where you're coming here from in the chat as well. I was delighted when Tamsin asked me to moderate this session, not least because Brett Scott and Indy Johar are two of the most fascinating writers and thinkers on these issues. And I think we're going to have a really fascinating conversation today. If our prep call is anything to go by, we got right stuck in. And I'm also, if I was to put it in the chat, this is my first one of the Senterej series, although I appreciate some of you have been to lots of them. But what I'm hoping we're going to be able to do today is kind of lift our eyes to the horizon and sort of imagine, what comes beyond the existing system that we have. What are the ideas and the governance and the institutions or the systems or the principles that we need to have a future that really does serve what we need as people and what we need on our planet. And I'm sure there's ideas from all of you who are joining us, as well as some useful provocations that Brett and Indy
Hello.
share.
Oh, sorry, Jo. Sorry, I was trying to mute the wrong. Please mute if you can.
So very much looking forward to your questions.
Yeah.
But really just wanted to start
Oh, fun.
Brett, who has done so much writing and thinking, particularly around subjects of money and of cash and how we move into the digital age, and indeed what that future looks like. How we can imagine that future. So, Brett, I wonder if you can share your thinking about how we are moving along that journey, or what some of the challenges we're going to face, some of the elements that we perhaps take for granted that are assumptions that we ought to challenge. So, Brett, please, the floor is yours.
All right, thanks. Yeah, I'm Brett Scott. My last book was Cloud Money, which was about this. It was about essentially the fusion of big finance and big tech, and how that manifests in a kind of cultural, ideological realm as this demonization of physical cash. All right, so I was looking at, I guess, capitalist acceleration processes. The fact that we live in an economic system where there is a constant prerogative to expand and accelerate. And anything that kind of goes against that value set is perceived to be anti-progress or anti-development or anti-whatever. And people are made to be ashamed at some point of desiring anything except speed and scale. and complexification in many ways. And so, a lot of my thinking on, my work on money, because I work a lot on different types of alternative money systems and anthropology of money and stuff like that. But engaging with this issue around cash really reveals lots of the dominant progress narratives that emanate from the centers of power in our society. This idea that what progress means and what the future entails is always this endless process of expansion, acceleration, growth, right? That anything that dares to articulate something else is not valid. Now, what's interesting is that many members of the public will go along with this narrative and yet not fully believe in it. For example, and if you go do work on the cash system and you go and ask people, hey, what do you feel about cash? A lot of people actually have a lot of fondness for physical money, and yet they nevertheless feel that there's something futile about any attempt to keep hold of it. And you ask them, where does that feeling emanate? Where does it come from? Why do you feel that? And they can't actually articulate it to you why they feel that. They just sense that there's something in the economic system that requires an endless process of increased automation and increased speed. And normally, the story that gets told, and sometimes people will actually adopt this, is that what's driving this is a human desire for endless convenience, a bottom-up desire for automation. People always want more. People always want more speed and so on. So this is the story. And actually, for a long time, this story has played out. It's been it's a dominant type of trope that you find in progress narratives, not only in capitalist societies. You'll find also in old sort of communist societies, you have this similar idea that human progress is this endless process of expansion and acceleration and complexification. All right, but it's quite noticeable that it's been a big element of the kind of free market progress narratives too. You let the markets run and it'll create endless convenience and consumer type of a consumer utopia. And that was a kind of a story that's been around for quite a long time. And I think there's an interesting moment right now where that story is breaking down. And I think it's particularly related to AI in this particular moment, where a lot of ordinary human beings on our planet are starting to become ever more aware that technological change processes have got almost nothing to do with their desire.
You what?
Right. And these processes will often just occur almost automatically, regardless of what their particular desire is. And I think one of the most interesting artifacts, it's called a cultural artifact to study if you want to see this, is Mark Andreessen's Techno-Optimist Manifesto, which came out in 2023. And I don't know how many of you saw this. Mark Andreessen's the world's most powerful venture capitalist. And he basically came out with this bombastic manifesto in 2023. He castigated anybody who dared to go against technological progress narratives as being some terrible Marxist Luddite who dares to rob humanity of their birthright, and which is, endless Promethean technological expansion. I mean, it's like a kind of ridiculous document, but it became very, very popular. And what was kind of interesting about it is that he kind of blends in this, on the one hand, these sort of free market utopian stories, which is basically, hey, if you let a market run, it will create this consumer utopia, endless innovation and incredible dynamism. All right. He has that story. That's a kind of like almost like a 1980s story. It's the kind of thing that Ronald Reagan and people like that would say. But then he has this other story that starts to come through, which is a different and darker story, which is more nihilistic, which is quite new, actually. Well, I think it's quite new, where he starts to say, even if you don't like progress, you have no choice. Right? You are a thing to be fed into what he calls the techno-capital machine. All right. And this is a new and sort of dark strain of sometimes what's called accelerationism. The idea that really all our stories about progress are kind of bullshit. What's really happening is that the capitalist system is going to eat you whether you want to be there or not. All right. And the question then becomes, is, are you going to position yourself on top of that process, or are you going to be on the bottom? All right. And people like Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, all the new tech oligarchs are leaning into this kind of right-wing nihilism where they're basically just saying, we're going to just drop the old free market progress narrative about capitalism, and we're just going to lean into the nihilism of it and just say, you either go with it or else you get destroyed. All right. And this is kind of an interesting moment. And I think it partly comes as a response to public horror about AI and the pointlessness of it. A lot of people with Enlightenment narratives were told, the point of automation is to save us from toil. And, but then this AI comes out and it starts to attack things that people actually enjoy doing, like music and writing and stuff like that. And they say, oh, wait, weren't we supposed to enjoy these things? Wasn't automation supposed to release us to do this kind of like stuff? And then, of course, the capitalists are like, hell no, we're going to automate the shit out of this, and you will now be relegated to some new thing, right? And so there's an interesting moment in the public where suddenly a lot of these progress narratives are feeling a lot more kind of thin, and which is why these tech lords are starting to come out with these more nihilistic narratives. But also, beyond that, it's actually opening up new ways for the public to start thinking about more progressive visions, beyond the kind of centrist kind of dogmas of the sort of like neoliberal era, to say, actually we can, the right wing is thinking bold now. They're going hard nihilistic on capitalism. We can start to think in other ways as well. So I think it's a very interesting moment for advancing particularly bold ideas. So I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much indeed, Brett. I think it's absolutely fascinating, kind of your perspective on this, and also there's so much there. I saw some people nodding as you were talking, like that rings really true. I was listening on the radio recently in the UK, and the UK science and tech minister was saying one of the biggest gaps that she sees at the moment is the excitement about AI from investors and people in the tech industry, and just how the public are just quite nonplussed by it. Like, yeah, some of them are using it, but also just really not feeling like it's this amazing thing that's going to save them. And I'm reminded of like the kind of sketches and reels that are like, is AI going to fold my laundry for me? Is it actually going to solve the real problems of my life? But then equally, that you do start to feel powerless when you're engaging with a company and you have an issue, you want to sort it out, and you can't even speak to somebody. You've got to go through an AI chatbot first, and it says, check the website, and you're like, well, I do know how to check a website. Like, if the answer was there, I'd probably have found it, and maybe I just need to speak to somebody. But it's assumed that is progress and that is better because they have to employ fewer people, when actually the consumer experience would probably be far improved by being able to speak to somebody about their challenge, where they could understand the nuance of it. And again, that goes back to your point about who is this for, who benefits. Undoubtedly, like, there's amazing potential in these technologies, but is it being designed and deployed to solve problems that we have, or is it being designed to in our extractive economic system, make the most money possible in the shortest period of time for a particular group of people who already have significant amounts? And
well, you can watch this. The best way to watch this, if you want to do ethnography on this, is just go to all the startup pitching contests and watch the entrepreneurs, because there's a whole sort of self-image of innovation. It's like, oh, I'm so goddamn innovative, aren't I, with my new automation technology? And it's like, I could have predicted you would have done that. It's very, very predictable what entrepreneurs will do. They act almost like clockwork, right? I mean, an AI can tell you what an entrepreneur is going to do. It's like, you will be funded by a venture capitalist if your innovation goes in a particular direction. If it doesn't, you'll be screened out and your innovation will not be expressed in society. All right. So there's a very narrow band of activities that are passed for innovation in our society. And then you have a class of people who are trained to talk about themselves and imagine themselves as this highly dynamic, innovative class. And yet, actually, if you really look at what's really funded and what's really actually considered acceptable innovation, it's all this banal shit, basically. All right. I've spent a lot of time in fintech circles and stuff, and it's incredibly banal what people imagine innovation is. Incredibly limited. It's not dynamic at all. And it's very predictable.
I'm going to use that as a great segue to bring in our other key speaker, Indy Johar. And I mean, innovation in particular, Indy's thinking spans so many different genres of ideas, and it's always innovative. So I know that you're going to give us more food for thought, Indy. So why don't you kind of pick up on anything from what Brett said that particularly sparked something in you, and perhaps share some of the other ideas and issues that you are spending time on at the moment?
Firstly, just an absolute love for Brett's passion and just the integrity of the work that he's done over many years. And Jo, thank you for everything that you've been driving. I say that partly because I'm gonna place a different part of the argument, right? So, but it comes out of love and care and appreciation, genuine appreciation for what I think Brett has been driving. So, the part of the argument that I'm going to start with is there's a post I put up about my daughter experiencing a retail worker. And I sort of said the kindness of machines was better than the obnoxiousness of labor. And what I meant by that was that actually how that retail worker reacted to my daughter, because they had been violated so significantly through the theory of labor and optimized, and how they made her feel was significantly worse than a machine would make her feel. Because actually the abuse of laborization of the human had constructed a sense of violence, permissive violence to the other. So I actually want to put forward a slightly controversial idea that I think the laborization of humans is far worse than actually the kind of the instruction quality of machines. So and the post I think Tamsin just put forward, and I say that in all sympathy for those. I don't blame the people the way they reacted. I think they were a functional result of the violence that's been generated, instrumentalization that's been generated, and they were reacting to protect themselves from the demands and servicing a customer, which dehumanizes their own reality in terms of actually becoming a servitude to a child. I get it. I fully say that in love and care. But I do recognize that the theory of labor perhaps is the most disrupting and dehumanizing thing of being a human, because humans aren't units of production. Humans aren't units of instruction. Human are agentic, multidimensional beings. So I want to open that up. And because I think actually there is something to be said about the violence of labor, which I think has been underdocumented by the left, right? So we evangelize the purpose of employment, we evangelize the expansion of employment, and actually because we're evangelizing the survival of people in an extractive system to pertain extractionism. So the dignity of labor may be a delusion that we need to challenge more significantly right now. Second, I also agree with Brett, and Brett, I'm going to make this a dialogue about what you said because I think it was really great. I'll add a few points, and I really, the manifesto that you pointed to by Mark Andreessen, I think is a really interesting question, because we have allowed the future to be constructed by venture capital. And venture capital, as you say, allocates resources for 100x returns on simple products and services and has a time cycle of return over the next 10 years. There are very few venture capitalists, very, very few, that can operate in an expansive domain significantly beyond that. And that means the future is being cast in that the future is being actively invested into that landscape. That also means that whole bunches of futures are being ignored and under-allocated towards. So there's a piece of work that we did in response to Mark Andreessen's thing called Hard Imagination, which we actually wrote as an active response saying, here's these other futures we're just ignoring that are equally interesting and expansive because venture capital doesn't understand. And that means our theory of allocating with risk to the future is broken. So I would like to say here, my invitation to you is how many of you want to challenge the venture capital model to absorb and challenge the theory of risk and value in a fundamentally different way? So my invitation to us is let's beat fucking Mark Andreessen, right? Beat him at his fucking game. That's my invitation. And if we're not willing to do that, I also question us collectively, right? I'm not interested in the commentary. I'm interested in, all right. There was also, I think, was really important what Mark Andreessen was saying, I think, which is important, is that we have become a manager. And this also goes back to people like Peter Thiel's arguments, which I think have coherency. He said that we have become a management financial society, i.e., we invest for options rather than for making the future. So he has an active critique that we have become a financialized society, not an engineering society. An engineering society makes the future, and an option society allocates options for potentially probabilities of making the future. It's an optionality. We have lost our sense of intentionality in terms of the future we wish to be in. And I think there's something interesting of, are we just becoming a financialized allocation society? And how much of our conversations are rooted in the destruction of the other rather.
Indy, your audio is just cutting in and out a little bit. I don't know if there's something obvious that you know might have happened that you can do. We can't hear you right now.
Oh, that's interesting.
Oh, that's better now.
Okay, sorry about that. And then the other thing I want to say is that I would argue the future cannot be degrowth. Not degrowth as it's politically said, as in not as it's politically understood. We need to degrow our material consumption, no doubt about it. We need to regenerate, and that's about sufficiency. We have to have material sufficiency. We have to have a regenerative biomaterial economy. We have to have a circular material economy, part of sufficiency landscape. We have to have an infinite intangibles economy. And we have to have a reproductive care economy. Those are 4 different economies that we have to manifest into circular sufficiency. And all those economies have different logics of intellectual property, capitalization, theories of value, theories of price. They are different. Our problem is we narrate our economy through a single dimension, typically the dimension of a material consumer economy that is only one of 4 dimensions of economies. And it is completely accurate, I think, biophysically, that we need to reduce our material economy to becoming sufficient. At the same time, it is completely accurate. We have to increase our reproductive economy of care, and we have to increase our intangible infinite economy, and we have to grow our biomaterial economy. And why this is important, that we're nuanced about this, is that degrowth puts us into a net zero game psychologically, not how it's technically, economically understood, but in the political conversation that it drives the conversation to net zero sum games, which means that the only way for differential, remember we live in inequality, for I to make progress relative to somebody else is I have to take something from somebody else. So unless we are actually able to find a new composite which allows for new equality to emerge and balancing, I think it becomes a systemic problem in that right. Finally, and I'll stop there, is that I also think we need to be politically pragmatic as to where our new economies will emerge. And I think one of the things for me is the greatest battle that we face in the next 5 to 10 years is what is the security economics of places. By security economics, I am referring to how do we provision energy, water, critical minerals, cognitive security, and nutrition systems. And those fundamental goods are so fundamental that if you lose them, you lose the social contract and all the derivative asset value. We are going to be in a conflict, a disagreement between market monopolists, public sector, and others, state evangelists, market evangelists. And by the way, I have a problem with both, because both are tools of problem. I think we need a third way. Sorry to coin an old phrase, but we need a third economic model outside those paradigms for the provision of those security economic goods. And if we are forces of the future economy, that is where I think the fundamental battle is. And if we lose those foundational goods, I think we'll lose the security, a pluralistic, multidimensional security of people and the derivative economies that those foundational goods will buy. So I suppose I sit here saying, this is the battleground for me. If we can fight for how we provide nutrition, water, energy, critical minerals and cognitive security in a radical new way and finance that, I think that is going to be, and it's going to be not rooted on efficiency of capital will be rooted on the continuity of provision. It'll be rooted in the continuity of provision in volatility. It'll be rooted not in extractionism, but in actually generative value. So, one thing we're looking at is how do you provide overabundance of energy? How do you finance abundant energy systems? What's your financial tool to do that? How we do that transition becomes really critical because you're no longer pricing units of energy, but something else. So I just wanted to lay out some dimensions of some of the conversation we were saying. I'm sure more will come as well. But yeah, all this is said, like, I just want to rephrase it because I'm saying it because I want to have a great conversation and with people I genuinely respect in the room and want to be part of this dialogue. So it's part of that ethos that I bring this into. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Indy. And I really like that setting out of those 4 different types of the elements that we will need all of in the economic future. And I wholeheartedly agree with that characterization of the kind of what the academics are talking about when they write about degrowth, which makes lots and lots of sense in terms of planning for our futures that are going to happen, and how do we work out what how we meet people's needs in those circumstances without it being some kind of massive collapse. And yet obviously the political way in which that is taken, and being able to change that narrative to being one that, yeah, it's still about life getting better, but also it's about those intangibles, and it's about that care and all the things that we really do want in our lives. And of course those can improve, but we reduce that resource base for what a good life is. I sometimes think it's quite helpful to also understand like how we get from here to there. So the labor example that you talked about really resonated, because I think it's very true that the focus on, our value being kind of bound up in our work is problematic. I mean, many people enjoy their work and find it meaningful, whether that work is paid or unpaid. But many people also find themselves in jobs where they work to live and they don't get treated well, and in some cases are very actively, abused or exploited. And in terms of our economic system, the way that it kind of treats human beings as labor inputs is problematic, because then also it becomes like a cost center to devalue. And if you value people less, then you've kind of made more profit. And so it's sort of baked into that model. In fact, I was earlier today in a meeting about macroeconomic models, and I asked the question, and how, when you're thinking about, material inputs and stocks, how do you also think about an energy inputs? How do you think about care? How does care fit into this macroeconomic modeling and people as individuals and their experiences? And I mean, the answer is basically, even from people that are doing really interesting thinking on these issues, it isn't factored in enough at all. But I think there's some really wonderful work that we saw presented by Olivier de Schutter, who's the UN Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty, and he is doing some work on how do you try to address extreme poverty and protect human rights without just relying on the growth narrative, right? What does that look like? Because we have this very embedded narrative of growth is what drives development. And of course, his argument is, when you look at the data, very often what is imposed on countries to develop actually doesn't allow them to invest in their education or health systems and so on in the way that they need to. But one of the pathways that he was setting out is, if you want to get to something like, human beings are valued, intrinsically without it having to rely on their role as labor, that might be a kind of Horizon 3 objective, but there might be different things that you can build on and layer in terms of policies that start to get you there. And that starts with labor rights and good relations with unions and strong labor voice, and it might then get to reduced working time, improved minimum wages, greater status for care workers, and you can sort of layer these policies towards you get to a position where actually people are valued and it isn't just all about labor. And then you can move to other policies, universal basic services, potentially universal basic income. And I mean, the solutions might look different in different places, but I think also trying to see how we can track pathways to get us from now in a very different system to where we ideally want to get is also important. Indy, your thoughts?
No, I was just going to sort of, the one thing I was going to say was that I'm just writing a piece called The Future of Being Human. Very, it's an indie piece. It's like very small and quick, but so it's not well researched and other things. I just want to preface that. But it sort of, I think there's the other side of the conversation, which is that I think we've been trained to be labor units, and rewilding us is an important part of that journey, not just the economic arrangement. And I think there's a really deep, hard question for us. What does it mean to be human? And what does it mean to be beyond labor? I think there's a developmental question for humans in that framework. I think we so instrumentalize and self-instrumentalize ourselves, and we've created machines in the same model of being labor units. We've constructed machines from a theory of labor as much as we've constructed ourselves. And that symbiotic journey, it's a human machine laborization journey that we've constructed. And unwinding that is a philosophical problem and is a developmental problem. And I think it's a development problem for how we imagine machines as much as we imagine labor. So I think there's a new reconciliation possible about that. So I just wanted to open the other side of that conversation, which I totally agree with is an economic conversation. I also think if I was making the plea, if anyone significant with resources allocated to AI, put 10% of your resources on the future of being human. Just 10. 90% put it on AI, sure, that's what you're meant to do, but put a hedge on what it means to be human, because I think that hedge will transform your theory of machines in that framework. So that's my plea.
Thanks very much for that, Indy. And I think that one of the perhaps most valuable things I find about AI is actually that it really forces us to grapple with that question about what does it mean to be human? Like, what is human? And it obviously isn't that you can identify what's a bus and what's a fire hydrant on a picture, right? I mean, but apparently that's all it takes. But we like, what is it that we get irritated about with AI? What is it where we really feel the value is? What are the things that are technology can be doing that, and that's absolutely fine. And what are the things that make much more sense for us that we really want to protect? Like, we want human judgment there. Like, what is the issue? Maybe we're fine with a summary of a database or finding some information, but when it's a decision that's being made that's affecting people's lives, what do we need about the judgment, and how much do we feel like the human bias is something which is an issue, or is a necessary element, because it also comes with it nuance and different abilities to take in context that is hard for AI. So I think that kind of philosophical side is really valuable. But I was going to come back to Brett, because I also thought in what you were saying there, Indy, about that beyond labor, like, what does it mean? What is meaning? I mean, my mind immediately goes to things like art and music, which, as Brett was saying, like, that's where AI is kind of suddenly going. We kind of think of those things very often as tangential to the economy, even sometimes as slightly tangential to the new economy, but perhaps less so. But also those are where there are really deep truths about humanity. And it doesn't matter your culture, it doesn't matter your religion, right? There's singing, there's dancing, there's movement, there's ritual, there's that element of culture. So what are those links about humanity and the technological world? Brett, over to you.
I'll try a riff on, there's lots of points to be made, but I mean, maybe one of the things is I kind of find the sort of quote unquote societal debate about AI kind of a bit obnoxious at some level, because it's very performative at some level. It's almost like we believe that we have a choice whether we use it or not. And we're going through the motions of a debate. It's like, oh, all the sort of newspaper columnists coming up being like, oh, but what do we think about AI? It's like AI is being rolled out regardless of whether you want it or not. And everyone can see it happening around them, right? And this is what's interesting about this political moment, because really what you should think about is like, why does that happen? And what do you do about that? Okay, so everyone's having these debates, and yet they will see their boss defaulting to AI. I have friends who work as designers, for example. They're having a lot of anxiety right now. But of course, in a capitalist, I mean, I'm being a bit reductionist at some level, but basically in an economic system that defaults to revenue expansion and cost cutting, their bosses will default almost like automatons to switching to AI. even if sometimes it's actually even more inefficient. They just feel like they have to, right? So regardless of the public debate, people will see this being rolled out around them, which is actually partly, if you're looking at the Techno-Optimist Manifesto, there's a reason why it comes out in 2023, because people like the venture capital industry can see that public angst, and they want to like lean in at that moment to say, to force feed a kind of progress narrative, to say, actually, this is for your own good. One of the most amazing lines out of the Techno-Optimist Manifesto, and actually, Indy, I didn't realize you guys had done a piece about this. I'd love to actually read it because it sounds fascinating. But one of the most like crazy, insane lines in it is where he talks about the techno-capital machine, which is basically just like technological capitalism, as being this like infinitely spiraling circle that just goes, that never ends. So he has this idea that there's this endless spiral of progress that you eventually, I guess, turn into a god. Okay. And it's like kind of like an insane version of just like normal sort of growth narratives. But he's trying to like paint this like insane sort of utopian picture about what happens when you just let the markets run, whilst also leaning into that narrative, which is like, if you don't like this, you're a terrible drag on society and evolution will destroy you, basically. And going to what Indy's saying is like, in a way, like, that's crazy. That sort of like nihilistic narrative that's coming out of the right wing actually provides opportunities for alternative narratives. It's totally true that people right now are having a moment where they say, okay, should we lean into that sort of like Silicon Valley narrative, or should we start to reconsider, what our actual role as human beings are? And that's what I guess, Indy, you're talking about. Do we have a moment now to start thinking, like, why do we think of ourselves as units of labor? Why do we think this? And so going beyond the sort of nihilistic / singularitarian vision and articulating something different is a very big thing to do right now. That's kind of what I'll say. Maybe the one last thing I'll say, just to maybe also, I don't want, this is a kind of a complex point to make, but also I think you got to see the kind of Andreessen moment in the context of liberal capitalism. And there was an inherent cognitive dissonance within liberal capitalism, which is the idea that you can kind of do well by doing good. All right. And that's always been, if you look at like somebody like Bill Gates, they're the kind of sort of like the liberal capitalist superhero. It's like, I'm going to get super rich from processes of capitalism, and then I will like distribute it to the world's poor. But then there's also this idea that you can sequence those two things together. All right. This is a very classic reformist mentality. We can have sustainable capitalism. We can have inclusive capitalism. And in a way, for the average person, it's a worldview that's incredibly cognitive, has a lot of cognitive dissonance in it, because you're basically being given two contradictory messages. You're being told, you got to play the market hard. You got to be an entrepreneur. You got to succeed against others. Basically, you got to be an asshole, but you simultaneously have to care. You simultaneously have to care about the people you're out competing. You simultaneously have to care about the environment. It's like asking a child to be a good boy and a bad boy simultaneously, and then wondering why they're confused. Okay. And there's a lot of, when you look at the kind of Trump moment where there's all this kind of like drill, baby, drill, it's kind of just being like, fuck the cognitive dissonance, just do capitalism, And Mark Andreessen has that same thing. It's why they kind of fixate upon this warrior ethos. It's like, drop the pretense of, trying to be nice capitalists and just, be a sort of vigorous masculine energy that kind of like penetrates the world, right? And I think that's important to deal with right now, because that's a kind of the narrative that they're going to articulate. So finding a new narrative that also brings in like a new vision of masculinity is important in this context.
I think that's really interesting, and I'm struck by what you say about the do well by doing good. And I think it's like, I equally don't think it's impossible, right? I think there are some people who are very genuine and do well, and they also do good. But I also think that they tend to, or organizations, but they also tend to be kind of outliers. Like, they're having to fight the system in order to do it, and they're absolutely bloody minded about it. And they're very morally driven very often. It's not because of the system. It's like in spite of the system they manage to do it. And so it's never going to be the way forward for how we can mainly get good done. I mean, I remember when I was working on business and human rights, going to this event, and somebody said, yeah, I mean, it's all very well to make the business case for human rights, and that's fine. But the bottom line is you can still make a lot of money by abusing human rights. And indeed, that's what happens. So there's something fundamental that needs to change about that. And I think the point that you make about philanthropy is well made. And I mean, Anand Giridharadas wrote a brilliant book on this. The whole model that you make a lot of money and then you kind of give it away. I mean, it's better than making a lot of money and not giving it away, but it's not a kind of substitution for the way in which the economic activity happens in the first place, being one that is, respectful and, at source helps to solve problems. Now, we don't have a system that facilitates or enables that at the moment, but it feels like that's absolutely where we need to get to, not this kind of, do bad over here and then have a little bit of, tokenistic tidying up over there. I'm going to come to questions, but I'm happy for you to come back, Brett, on that, and also to go to Indy. And then if people in the audience, I know the chat has been very vibrant, as I'm sure is normally the case, and keen to get some of those voices into the discussion. I know Richard had his hand up earlier. So, Brett, did you want to come back on that?
I mean, maybe I'll just add that I think, the sort of, I've spent lots of time in the sustainable finance community and all this kind of stuff. So, and ESG type stuff. So I'm quite familiar with the dynamics of it. And I understand why those debates happen. If you're stuck in a big market system, it makes sense to think about, okay, if I want to change something, work with the dynamics of the market rather than against it. And so all those stories about, okay, how do you harmonize market processes with some outcome beyond exploitation and stuff? I understand why those debates happen, but when those debates are pushed widely to people who are often struggling in a society, it actually creates a lot of confusion, right? A lot of people who are struggling at the lowest end of society, and you say, hey, the dominant narrative that's always forced down your throat is compete the hell out of the economy. You got to fight for survival. And then when you add a new burden on them, you say, and you also have got to be a good person simultaneously. It's no wonder that people kind of like react against that at some point, right? And it's I don't want to try to give sort of cheap accounts of the sort of Trump phenomenon and populism, but there's a lot of those dynamics in that kind of stuff. When you ask, why does somebody cheer when Trump says drill, baby, drill? Is it because they hate the environment? No, they hate the cognitive dissonance of being asked to do incompatible things. All right. So that's often what that sort of elation comes from, in a sense, at least from my perspective. I mean, I deal with a lot of young men who approach me because I write about money, and I see the right-wing turn in young men. It's scary. Yeah. It's like me going back to South Africa. I'm from South Africa, and it's like shit that the South African government would say in the 1970s. It's like old school social conservatism that these like young 20-year-old men are saying to me. And it's like kind of scary, but then I'm like, why do they have this desire to suddenly be this strange sort of conservative moral narrative that they want to adopt? And so I think those are really, really deep questions we've got to grapple with.
Yeah, absolutely. Indy, I'm going to bring you in before we get some comments from everyone else on the call.
I appreciate that. And I think Brett, you pointed to this idea of the future of masculinity. I think, and Sophie Strand's work on Flowering Wand, I think, is the most exquisite piece of writing and thinking around challenging masculinity and our visions of masculinity. So I really think there's something really important there. And I just want to reference Sophie Strand's work on that. I do think you're also right to say, I think, why is there this conservative theory of power? And I think part of that is a function that I think we're in a thermodynamic moment where we are not into an expansive thermodynamic moment of society. So the thermodynamic capacity of society is decreasing, and we're moving into an age of conflict, of power, in that loss of expansion. So we're going to have to deal with some fundamental questions of power and agency as we have a loss of thermodynamic. And I think it is at that level. There's the kind of renegotiation of power and distribution. I do also want to sort of perhaps narrate the drill, baby, drill stuff slightly differently, just for conversational purposes. If you perceive AI is a technology which will have an existential power. It's a general purpose technology which will disproportionately and existentially change the world. And I know this verbatim, that there are people in significant halls of power who believe this is a technology which will either continue 50 years of hegemony and power, or if they do not have it, they will become a vassal state. That is the polar view of it, right? If America develops AGI, there's a recursive moment of capability that it will have 50 years of hegemony, and the hegemony is the idea of America as a nation, right? This is an idea of America as a nation, and if they do not have it, they will become a vassal state, i.e. the death of a nation. If you run that as your frame of analysis, you then run that it is existential to the idea of America to drill, baby, drill, because the current energy infrastructure is not going to be available to be able to provide a pathway to AGI till they get micronuclear in play. So in that moment, and if you recognize that the value chain is, I don't hate using AGI all the time, but if you recognize there's some automation milestone which disrupts labor, which creates a new energy demand, which thereby changes your capacity to deal with water and nutrition, because the cost of energy becomes so near zero with micronuclear, you're running a cascading market effect at fundamentally changing the fundamental ecosystems of civilization, which go from labor, or 20th century labor, energy, water, nutrition are being cascaded through that landscape. And the only reason I'm narrating it through that lens is I think it's really important, for me at least, to imagine that our counterparties are smart, not idiots. And I think they are smart in a sense that they are prioritizing that pathway over the verbatim words I've had are, we will deal with climate change. And you've probably all heard, we'll deal with climate change later. Because once you've got an energy infrastructure and the unit cost of energy is low enough, then carbon capture and other things become possible. So they are running a logic stream. We may not agree with it. I certainly don't agree with it. But I want to at least recognize the pathways and the logic streams that they're running in order for us to intervene and shift those logic streams and create different political consensuses that are necessary. So I just wanted to maybe narrate a slightly different position or a
totally agree.
position.
Totally agree.
That would be good for us to then intervene on. Yeah, thanks. Thanks.
Keen to get some of the amazing voices in the room joining us. I know, Richard, you've had your hand up and down, and I know there's also been some useful comments in the chat seeking some, what are the solutions? What are the blueprints? So I don't know, Richard, if you want to come in, and also whether Susie and or Emmanuel are keen to just vocalize your comments in a question or some thoughts. Richard.
Thanks, Jo. This is all fascinating. I'm particularly fascinated by Brett's, to some sort of, some of what he said. That essentially we're in a situation where you have to do good. You can do good as long as you don't sacrifice growth. And essentially that's where we are. And I'm an anthropologist, and like Brett, I've done some stuff with money. And one of the things that I think is essential we need to consider, and I want to get their views of it, is that when money, of course, economists like to see as sort of neutral, which is a consequence of their mistaken the transition from barter to money. But we create money as interest-bearing debt. And there's been others written about how, to some extent, that creates an imperative to growth. Banks create interest as debt. That's how we create most of our money supply. That means they're creating the principal, not the interest that has to come from somewhere. Now, in that, and there's some, obviously, literature on how, in fact, we can keep money as debt and still be sustainable, and we can talk about that if you want to. But the point I want to make is that if growth is the imperative that we have to deal with in any of the problems we talk about, then there's two kinds of growth you have to talk about. One is growth in GDP, which is what most people talk about. And I think you can show, as others have, Paul Krugman among others, that again you have to have growth. Once you have money as interest-bearing debt, you have to have growth. The other thing you have to have is, if you want a return on capital, you have to have growth. And growth in GDP and return on capital are two of the, again, major issues that the investor class obviously considers. Now, the question is, how can you possibly deal with some of the issues we have regarding labor, climate change, whatever, without addressing how we create money and how banks have been given the, in effect, exclusive right to issue money as debt? And my question is, again, in effect, is how do you build that into the discussions when you start talking about, what some of the solutions can possibly be? Because in fact, anything that interferes with growth, it has nothing to do with progress, nothing to do with innovation, as people like to make us think. It has to do with, in effect, maintaining the debt-based economy. And we're already at a point where, for example, in sovereign debt, it can never be paid off. Impossible. And unless you have massive inflation. So again, my question is, I apologize for going on so long. My question is, how in effect can you deal with some of the issues we're talking about? Whether they have to do with humanistic issues, whether they have to do with practical issues such as climate change, poverty, etc., without addressing our means of creating money.
Thank you, Richard. And I'm going to come straight to you, Brett.
Yeah, so I am always a little bit skeptical about whether the growth imperative emerges from, okay, the way I'd put it is, I do a lot of work on monetary systems. I actually spent the last 4 hours doing a MMT documentary with a Dutch TV station. So, that's a kind of whole sort of monetary theory. And so, I spent a lot of time around this scene. And yeah, the one thing I would be wary of is imagining that the growth emerges from interest itself. All right. When you're looking at the banking sector issues most of the money in society, right? If I was describing it, they issue digital casino chips. Yes, so when you credit creation processes in the banking sector, they're pushing money out into society as a sort of second layer of money, right? And the thing is, though, in the banking sector, they do this under the assumption that growth is going to happen. All right, banks don't lend unless they perceive the future repayment. So they're often leaning into a situation where they're imagining growth is going to happen. Now, what happens is it's not, to me, it's not that causes growth to happen. It's more that we end up in a hostage situation where if it doesn't happen, the financial sector breaks. Okay, so you end up with governments essentially in hostage to the financial sector, trying to protect the future growth in order to avoid financial crises. All right, I personally wouldn't imagine, though, that the growth itself emerges from the requirement to pay interest. All right, the growth is an imperative within the capitalist system more generally. All right, so so I don't want to misrepresent your position, but sometimes I feel like I spend a lot of time around monetary reform circles, and sometimes people have this almost mathematical understanding of the system where they say there's this impossibility of paying the stuff back. It's an impossibility mathematically, and that must be the thing that's driving the system. In reality, the mathematics of money can be broken like that if there's a political will to do it. All right, you can destroy debt. You can just write off debt. It's not forcing anything. It's a political decision to let those contracts stay in place. All right. So, the basic thing is that, yes, we do end up politically captured by the financial sector, and that will put states in a position where they're constantly trying to force the growth narrative. But I don't think it's necessarily the debt itself that has some kind of ability to do that. I don't know if that fully makes sense, but there's definitely a lot of work to be done on how do you get the banking sector to allocate money in a more productive way. All right. So that could even be through the public provision of money rather than through the private banking sector, or it can be through public steering of the banking sector, or it can be through alternative money systems, which are much smaller and much harder to work with. But of course, there's definitely a huge need to create a lot more public steering, democratic steering of the allocation of new money in an economy. I'm not sure if that's a satisfactory answer for you, Richard. Let me know.
I'm obviously seeing that Jerry's got his hand up, and I'm also just noticing that the comment in the chat from Susie, which she was saying that Richard had said we have a death-based economy, but I think you said debt-based economy. I don't know if you can confirm that was what you said, Richard.
Yes, I know that's what he said. I just misheard it, and I
I
love when
said
that happens.
Oh, I got it, Susie. So yeah,
sorry about that.
That's okay, but I think the prompt that it led to was fantastic, because I thought the second part of your comment about a life-based economy is totally spot on. And the Braiding Sweetgrass, for people who haven't read it, is Robin Wall Kimmerer's book on this. And I think there is, as you say, huge power in nature, and obviously the blind spot that economies have for nature and that kind of interdependency, which it's just how biological systems operate. And yet it's even the language and the models that we use to understand the economy are very mechanistic in nature rather than life-based. And so I think sometimes even the analogies that we use can help us get to a place that imagines something that is more fitting for what we need in the 21st century. I'm going to come to Jerry, and others, please do raise your hands. There's been so much comment in the chat. I haven't been able to read absolutely everything, but I'm keen to get more voices in, and then bring in Indy as well to respond.
Can you hear me? Okay. I'm slightly concerned about talking about doing good and doing bad, or assuming that there are different things going on. And I find the whole discourse around philanthropy and altruism something that we dupe ourselves on if we don't understand and recognize that there is an exchange going on. In one way, there may be money changing hands. In another way, there's a lot of power. There's a lot of kudos. There's maybe there's some kind of deal with the eternal maker. But there are things being exchanged, and the idea that philanthropists are basically working out of the goodness of their heart is something we should disabuse ourselves of. There's an exchange going on, and it's reciprocity is probably what drives human beings a great deal more than other things. And I think unless we begin to think about what is being exchanged, what is the reciprocal relationship between different players, the poor, the rich, the ones with a relationship to God, the ones without, the ones who have accumulated mass fortunes and the ones who haven't. We're never going to get better at understanding how much of a construct money is. And indeed, as Brett just said, you can eliminate debt. We've all bought into this world of resources. I mean, if you'd gone back in time, I'm an anthropologist, so if you'd gone back in time and talked to people dealing with the Kula ring about the elimination of the Kula, you would have had a very similar reaction than the one we're having now about the elimination of banks and capitalism and all the rest of it. But anyway, I'll stop there. I think we don't put reciprocity into the picture enough.
Indy, can I invite you to respond on reciprocity?
So yes, I think I have. Sorry, so Jerry, you probably know how I'm going to probably react to this. So I think this goes to the heart of something I think quite important, which is I think we are operating in a landscape. So I'm going to make a conjecture that in a land where we operate through divisibility and separation, when I perceive myself separate from the planet, separate from other people, and I've objectified myself and others and subjectified others, then morality has to be born. as a means to hold coherence. Morality is a function of separation, i.e., only in separation do I have to manifest a morality as a means of self-correcting myself and the violence that I've permitted in my separation. And why I say that is that I think we often, and this is, I think, to me, what I was reading into your point, Brett, about trying to be moral, the morality is a synthetic fix for preserving my separation and my lack of entanglement. And it's sort of a conceit, because effectively it's a wrapper to preserve that separation, as opposed to recognizing deeply my relationality and my non-divisibility. And this is rooted in so many things. It's rooted in the private limited company. It's rooted in the theory of boundary. It's rooted in our conception of selves as individuals. It's rooted in property theory, which is rooted around boundary models of thinking. So we've then created an ontological stack which goes all the way through society. And I think what we're seeing when we talk about morality or altruism is just a symbol of preserving that ontological stack of separation rather than actually fixing it at root level, which I think demands us to change the absolute codes of capital, which are property, nature of monetary formation, all the way through to our recognition of ourselves, not as units of labor, theory of accounting. All of that stack becomes vulnerable. And so I think you're right, Jerry, if I've understood what you're saying. I think the fix that we've come to, you could argue, impact entrepreneurship, the good economy, all these things, they are synthetic fixes to trying to avoid going deep into the problem, which is a 400-year transformation, or at least when the empire model metamorphosized into colonialism to be able to become a global system. I think there's something really important there. And that's how this is why I think there's something much deeper going on in our theory of the economic renewal, which won't be done as minor adjustments to those things. So I don't know, Jerry, if that's a fair interpretation of what you were trying to lead me into and open up that conversation, but that's how I heard it, I suppose.
No, thank you. And I only wanted to say on that point that I think it's nothing to do with moral goodness. It's essentially what drives, I mean, who does the washing up? Who takes the rubbish out? There is a innate sense of, I think this is fair, I think this is unfair, that actually drives human behavior that we're not activating and weaponizing enough, to be honest, because people are feeling very strongly about the unfairness of things. And,
exactly.
And therefore reciprocity as a mechanism helps there.
Can I just say, and maybe just hand over to you, Joe, on this? I think this is why the most revolutionary thing we could think about right now is what is the reproduction economy of care. Because I think it is the fundamental thing we've been harvesting in the production of labor units. And I think there's something really important. And when I was talking about sufficiency, regeneration, infinite economies, and reproduction economies of care, unless we can think about all those stacks as different, I think we're nowhere close to the new economic arguments that need to be in play. So, and no, I know, Joe, you've been doing some work and supporting some work around care economics and stuff like that as well, which I think is a really important part of that story.
Yeah, I would agree. I just also wanted to share a conversation I was having yesterday. I was at a philanthropy funders conference, and we were kind of talking about how people act and taking more than their fair share. And we were at a drinks reception, and there was a tray of drinks that you could take one as you went in. And I just said to somebody, of course, people wouldn't come into this room and take all of the drinks, right? It would just be seen as, you just would not do that because, well, you would feel bad about it, but also because you were in a fairly small room and everybody would see you do that and there would be a lot of judgment. And yet the complexity and the scale of our economic systems that have been created as that expansion of economics has happened out with the scale of what we touch and feel on a day-to-day basis, has meant that we haven't got the kind of mechanisms for that. So we do often feel like completely separated from the other people that are engaged in those transactions, and it's kind of taking it away from the kind of human experience of it, and people almost feel as if they are, they're acting, and there's, you know, the things that they do are a victimless crime, as it were. So I think that's interesting. And how can we enable people to have those connections? And I think part of it does have to be the scale at which it happens. That's not saying everything has to be at the local scale, but I also feel, you know, Schumacher had a very good point, right? Like there is a lot of beauty in a scale that we can get our heads around, that we can understand, and often also where you see the fastest progress. I mean, I come from Scotland. It's a country of 5 million people, and it doesn't matter what field you are in. You know, if you're a doctor, if you're in a particular business sector, if you're an academic, you know the other people in that field. You've met them personally, in person, and it makes everything quicker and easier to do, because you kind of start from a place of human connection. So that was what I really wanted to share on that. But I think that care economy, it's also about a foundational principle, and I love that, you know, separation as ontological stack, because that's gone round in my head a lot. Like, we are just feeling so separated from each other, and it is intrinsic. And I think care is also a way to reconnect with others. And it's not just care in the social care sector, which is very important, right? That's part of it. But then it's the care that's done on a voluntary, unpaid basis. It's the care for our neighbours or our friends that we don't think of as care. It's care for the community. It's care for the environment. It's care for inanimate objects, because we want them to, you know, resources to be well looked after. It's a mindset. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of being. So it's much more significant than just, you know, how it's often used. I've got Richard's got his hand up again, but I am going to come to Emmanuel first, because obviously we've already heard from you, Richard, and would be love to hear from you again. But I want to make sure we get other voices in the discussion as well. And so I would also encourage, I know, Tanuja, you've put various fantastic things in the chat. I would love it if you were able to put your hand up and come into the discussion as well. But I'll come to you just now, Emmanuel.
Thank you. You hear me? Yeah. I thank you very much for this wonderful exchange and dialogue. It's my first time. I'm coming from a world of happiness. So, and I will speak simple. What I think is, I've been all of my life, professional life, dealing and working on two issues, which is complexity and coherence. So the link between simplicity and complexity, and especially in happiness. And what I want to point here is, I like, Indy, to continue on your 4 economies, because what we say in our field and my network is the beauty of happiness is that economy cannot grow as it is today, but happiness can grow indefinitely. That's what I understand, Indy, from what you said. And that's a beauty. Let's go not only beyond GDP. Yesterday, OECD updated the monitor for well-being, which is nice, but I suggest to go even much farther. I mean, let's just say people just want happiness. And that's as simple as that. So all the rest we don't need. And the beauty with happiness is not only it can grow indefinitely. The more I give happiness, the more I'm happy. So I can give it indefinitely. I'm even more happy. And it's all this has been backed by studies, by the way. It's not just thoughts. But also, actually, we need very little to be happy. When you see in the world places, spaces, communities, and so, and you see what is really needed to be happy and to make other people happy, it's actually relatively little. It's a fraction of what is offered in our world today. And so the question, the point about reducing materials and so is immediately solved if we would all switch the governments and organizations into happiness. And the beauty we have also in our field of happiness is that we don't need philanthropy, because actually philanthropists are very nice, but I'm not sure they are very happy themselves. So the beauty with happiness is that if it works well and if the people are happy, it makes money. And I'm in an industry which is constantly making money by making people happy. And that's not a problem to say that. We don't need free money from philanthropists, which are not free anyway. There is an exchange. I totally agree with Jerry. So let's just say, let's not put the baby away with the water and the economic assumptions, everything. We can do both together. It's not, we don't need to scream against the economy and money. We just go slowly, step by step, and just refocus completely what is my goal tomorrow and what is my goal long term. It's just to make people happy because that makes me more happy. And I will finish with this point is that my deep conviction is that the whole focus is to go away from items, this or that or this. Everything is in the links. And the complexity lies in the links between the things, not in the things. And indeed, this economy further, and I'm an engineer, by the way, so I know about mechanics and all these things. Let's forget about the things. Let's concentrate on the links between the things, the links between what happens in me, to be, just a human, me with the others, and me with nature. It's the link which is important. It's not me, the other, or nature.
Thank you so much for that, Emmanuel. And I'm going to take Tanuja into the conversation now as well, and then we'll come back to Brett and to Indy to respond to these points.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I have so many points, and thank you to the speakers, but maybe I could try and contribute by saying things a bit on the edges of the discussions today. We are talking here about designing or a new systems. And perhaps if we looked at living systems as systems of agency, of cognition, then we would design for the flow. We would design for the flow of cognition, of agency itself. And when we think like that, we are immediately drawn into the beingness of it, not the doingness of it. Almost everything we have today is designed for doing. We measure the doing, we define ourselves, we value it, and so on. And which brings me to the other point that is often discussed in economic discussions, is the idea of value. And the discussion usually goes around the value of money and what do we value more? Does money represent correctly what we truly value? And I'd like to say that there is much that we can do in our personal lives, in our current economic system, to change the way things are valued simply by emphasizing, changing the amount of time we place on certain things that we value more than others. We spend 8 to 10 hours a day in our professional lives at work. And that by just that act itself implies that we value that productivity type of activity more than anything else. Simply by changing that emphasis, we can do a great deal. We can do a very great deal. And finally, I'd like to say that there is no design of anything that doesn't have a shadow side. Every model, every design has both a light side and a shadow side. If we feel ourselves as responsible designers, at the time we put forward a system design, we should also declare the shadow side. By doing so, the mitigations will appear automatically. And when we move from model to model to model, as we must do as we adapt in life, the shadow sides will change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanuja. And that shout out goes for others who've been active in the chat as well. If you need that encouragement, here's your reminder that you can put your hand up and contribute to the conversation in audio as well. I'm going to come to Brett first of all. There's lots there on value, and what does money represent, and happiness and the relationship with your work as well, Brett. What's your thinking?
Yeah, so I love when with Emmanuel saying people need very little to have a sense of well-being, a sense of contentment. I mean, I personally don't use happiness as the frame. I'm a bit darker. I'm a bit more like existentialist, maybe. I tend to think like, an authentic, engaged life, which sometimes has happiness in it, but not necessarily. But I resonate with that point around, it's not like material goods and complexity and endless stuff somehow has anything to do with what makes people actually happy. People like hanging around a fire on a beach drinking beer. I mean, that's what they like doing. They don't want to sit in virtual reality eating McDonald's. Really, it's not like there's some inherent connection between a vast fast food chain and an incredibly complex technology that somehow increases societal happiness. Often it's the opposite, right? From a kind of like almost development sort of thinking, in typical economic dogma, it's imagined that economic growth somehow increases human well-being, but economic growth often just increases our needs, right? An increase. If you're imagining a human economy as a gigantic interdependent structure, what economic growth means is that you're essentially increasing the number of inputs that are required to continue to survive. All right. So economic growth is actually often an increase in the amount of stuff you need to continue to meet the baseline requirement to keep on surviving. All right. A hunter-gatherer did not need mobile phones to survive, whereas you definitely do, right? Which is why we find incredible levels of poverty in incredibly high production societies. All right. So this is the concept of relative poverty, the fact that the mere increase in production does not mean poverty disappears. Actually, it can increase poverty because the relative amount that you require is going up at the same time as economic growth. And so this whole fixation on the absolute amount of stuff is ridiculous, right? The real question is about the distributions of things in a society. Maybe that resonates a bit with Emmanuel's point around the connections between things. That's really what's the important thing is in the society is the sort of interconnections. And actually, maybe just to tie up to Indy's earlier point about degrowth, one of the problems about the sort of degrowth movement is the framing of that thing is it's being framed as this thing you're taking away. All right. So you're saying you have the sort of linear notion of progress, which is like we have a singular concept of progress, and then which is like growth, and then you're pulling it away. Whereas when I'm speaking about degrowth, I would use a term like re-leisure, for example. Something like that, to say like what's happening here as we articulating a different concept of progress, all right, rather than talking about something being taken away from something else. If I was using a sensory metaphor, I'd say something like, if I've spent my lifetime staring really hard and like fixating upon sight, starting to think about like hearing more. All right. So thinking about the types of senses that we don't emphasize. So I think, in terms of like this rebalancing towards happiness economies, it's about thinking about how do you start to move beyond singular concepts of progress and start to think about how do we create a holistic balance between different types of progress, maybe. And maybe this ties into Tanuja's point as well about the fact that, as you sit there on your desk for, 15 hours a day, you're leaning into a very particular form of progress, which is often forced upon people from a systemic structural perspective, right? But it's coming at the cost of many other types of progress. I'll leave it there.
And I'm going to come to you, Indy, and then to Samantha, who I'm delighted has also put her hand up.
Yeah, I just love the re-leisure our economy thing, right? I think so. I love it. Yeah, I'm not sure what more I can really add really to what's been said
Emmanuel
right now.
wanted a bit more on your four economies. Do you think you could just delve into that a little bit more deeply?
Yeah, sure. So for me, the care reproduction economy is, it's not. Whilst I'm interested in our our structured care economy, I'm actually more interested in how do we create environments that support me to care for my kids or to care for my environment. I'm interested in the intrinsic nature of care as a non-commercial, non-financialized economy and why that's critical because care operates fundamentally different in a different model. It expands. It's not a transformation of doing, it's a transformation of me. And I think that needs a whole different economic arrangement. It cannot be financialized, yet it needs to be resourced. So there's something really interesting. And and what we've done, for example, and I think, the financialization of our economy, which I would argue Margaret Thatcher was, very pertinent in doing, actually, and then, we lost, for example, Sundays, which were a non-commercial day, which meant that the idea of expressing yourself through consumerism and consumption was actually not available. So you had to find alternative means of expressing your humanity. And we expanded the financial consumer space to the point that it actually, many of us, I think, have no choice but to be financializing ourselves to exist. So I think there's a financialized slavery, and I want to use that word because I don't think there's intrinsic choice. And our whole economic narratives are you should be working. If you're not working, we will penalize you. Workless people are terrible. Like we have built this whole societal narrative on the enslaving of labor, which I think is really problematic. And I think it's misunderstanding the roots of labor and Protestant theory and Lutheranism, which is the dignity of labor in an inherent right. But we have to create the conditions for a dignity of labor in a fundamentally different way. So I think I just wanted to unpack that a little bit because I think it's really important to see the system level moves that have been made to monetize our economy in a very particular way, which have actually undermined the care economy fundamentally. It's undermined, the value of soil doesn't exist. So we've created an economy of dead things, which values trees for their timber as opposed to trees as the intrinsic thing. So we've created intentionally a dead economy, optimizes the dead. We've intentionally created a waste economy because there's no embodied cost to sufficiency. There's no embodied liability to the management of end of life of material waste that is proportionate to the harm it creates. So, a plastic cup lives forever. Put the fucking discount rate on that every time you drink from a plastic cup in terms of how long that will be infinitely poisoning us. So I think we're not adequately understanding the effects. So we've created synthetic economies, every one of those chains. And sufficiency for me is not rationing, right? So I'm not interested in a rationing economy. I'm interested in the ennoblement of us as people to understand our capacity for sufficiency and our capacity for infiniteness in certain domains and our capacity for care in certain domains. So at the heart of this is why I go back to my point about there is a human development conversation. As schools were built to build the industrial age and laborize us and to train us for instruction, to train us for predictability, I think there's a new expansion of what is required to be human in order to create a new thesis of sufficiency, which is rooted in systemic intergenerational sufficiency in care, as well as functional space for care and an economy which is enabling care and an infinite intangibles economy that can be happiness, that can be other things, that can be information systems, can be a whole bunch of other things. And then we have to create a new economy of regeneration. And that means changing discount rates. It means changing maybe even nature of money relative to those economies. It may mean that nature economy investments are negative interest rate investments. It might mean adjusting all of our tools as first horizon, 1.5 horizon adjustments to allow for us to value those different economies in different ways, to then create a threshold for more complex, rich arguments further down the track. And maybe the simple thing for me would be repealing the Sunday trading laws. Step one.
Just before Samantha, sorry, can I quickly? I love the stuff about the Sunday trading laws and the Trading Act that was pushed by the retailers actually, because in Germany here where I am, they don't have Sunday trading. It's amazing. You basically see this. It's almost like a damn wall that's built against a certain. You're actually forced to have a different set of values on that day. And what I always find, in our society, consumption is actually a form of work. I think a lot of the type of consumption that we do on the weekends is a type of working. All right, we've been encouraged to imagine that consumption equates to leisure, but I really don't think it does. There's nuance to this, but I really, it's kind of an amazing experience being here in Germany when I used to live in the UK, and actually being forced to have this day on Sunday where you cannot go to the shops, and you suddenly see this whole other parts of your mind opening up as you realize you're not going to just sort of default into this consumption behavior on that day.
Thanks so much. And yeah, consumption is work. I'm very aware of that in the run up to Christmas. And yeah, I'm sure there'll be others on the call who feel that a little bit as well, and that tension. I'm going to come to Samantha and then to Jean, and we've not got a huge amount of time. So if Indy and Brett are content, I plan for us to take with us Samantha and Jean's comments and give them the space to share.
Thank you. So I think with my comments, I'm going to be pointing to somebody else, but I just wanted to say that I've been a part of these conversations, I think from the beginning, and even from the article that talked about the Senterej and all the way till the final one. And so I'm very excited about this journey. It's been exciting for those of us who've been here the whole time, and I'm sure it is also for those who are joining us. I wanted to say that what I'm observing is hospicing. There's somebody who said something about the death economy. There is something that's dying. And from what everybody is describing is we're in a process of trying to find what is valuable that we want to keep and what needs to go. And so everybody is going about it in their own way. I'd like to direct you to the Bacana two loops model. And so if you look at the two loops model, something is dying and it will die, it will collapse, but then something else is emerging. And so we have on the call Kara. I know we don't have time to talk to her today, but she can put her details. She has a beautiful model of what could emerge at the end of this collapse. And it's been my desire, and I know a lot more on the call have been saying, can we just stop talking about what's collapsing? Can we talk about something new? And I believe that that's what we need to do, even as a group. There are those who want to hospice, and you have all the time you need to do that, but it's dying, and you need to think about what's emerging. Then the other thing I wanted to talk about, I'm just briefly going to touch on Kara's model. It's beautiful. You have to listen to her because she has a very vivid presentation. However, she's building on the work of Arthur Koestler, who's talking about a holachy. And so you have, Indy was talking about an agentic, that we all now need to have a more agentic existence. She's designed that in her model using the term holons. And the term holon comes from Greek, where you have holos, which is whole, and on, which is an individual. And so this new system will have individuals who are coming together to create a new whole. The holons of the old system are going to crash with it if they don't change. And so I would really encourage you, it's very exciting to do postmortems and find out, what's dying, what will die first, and make all these negative prognostics, but something positive is emerging. And if you want to be in the group that's building that, I would really encourage you to start looking for emergent solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. I'm conscious of time. Jean, are you able to make a short contribution of 30 seconds or so in the time that we have?
Right. I greatly appreciate the conversation. I have a very practical idea. It's called the Currency Sustainability Standard. I put my email, I'll put it in again if anyone's interested in it. It's very practical. It's how you change money by making the value of money based upon social ethics that I think we're all talking about. And then I think it changes how, in one sense, it's very simple. On the other sense, it's very complicated because then you have to have a Bretton Woods 3 where you change the whole monetary regime. So I'll put my email in again. If anyone's interested, please contact me.
And thank you so much, Jean, and to everybody, to Indy and Brett in particular, for being such fantastic dialogue discussants, and to all of you for your engaged discussion, both verbally and in the chat. I mean, there's so much in the chat. I've only scratched the surface of it, so I'm delighted that Tamsin's explained that will all be sent out to participants with the notes. And indeed, Cara, your TEDx talk, when the link is available, I'm sure you can share it with Tamsin, and that can also be shared either with this or at some future point. Thank you so much for your engagement and fantastic thinking together this afternoon. I hope that has given you some nourishment for the soul to go forward to the rest of your Thursday with. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank
Thanks.
you.